throughout the generations. Just going to give a minute to sit with that. And quickly, a word on Zoom etiquette. We're happy to have you keep your video on so we can see your faces and reactions and feel connected. We ask that you keep your audio muted if you aren't talking and use the chat to ask questions for now. It should be noted that we are recording tonight's webinar. So if you are uncomfortable with having your face seen on video, you might want to mute your video. And apparently my laundry's done. I apologize for that interruption. Our every other week online conversation series has been a way to help us engage, learn, and discern how to make the changes we've been yearning for. The upheavals of 2020 inspired us to start this, and we plan to keep them going as one way to not return to business as usual. And then with that, I'd like to introduce the conversation that we're having tonight. So as I'm sure all of us on the call are painfully aware of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, a discussion of U.S. nuclear weapons policy and how it relates to U.S. foreign policy and how we engage the world is more vital than ever, especially considering the escalating violence in Ukraine. So with that, we invited Michael Klare, who's the Five College Professor Emeritus of Peace and World Security Studies and Director of the Five College Program in Peace and World Security Studies. He holds a BA and an MA from Columbia University and a PhD from the Graduate School of the Union Institute. He's written widely on U.S. military policy, international peace and security affairs, the global arms trade, and global resource politics. His books include America's Arms Supermarket, Low Intensity Warfare, Peace and World Security Studies, a Curriculum Guide. I totally lost my space. Thanks, Lucy the cat.
That's enough.
Okay. He serves on the board of the Arms Control Association and advises other organizations in the field, and is co-founder and co-chair of the Committee for a Sane U.S.-China Policy, which seeks to reduce the risks of war with China. And then our other presenter is Denise Duffield, who's Associate Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility LA and directs its Nuclear Threats Program, which advocates for health protective policies related to nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. She leads PSR LA's participation in the National Back from the Brink campaign, which brings local communities together to build the public support and political will needed to fundamentally change U.S. nuclear weapons policy. Denise also works on environmental health and justice issues, addressing the needs of local communities who are impacted by toxic contamination and the failure of regulatory agencies to protect them. She leads PSR LA's efforts to ensure a full cleanup of Santa Susana Field Laboratory, a former nuclear and rocket testing facility near LA. Denise also serves on the board of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, a national network of organization that works to address issues of nuclear weapons production and waste cleanup. And with that, I give you Michael Klare.
And hello everyone this evening. This is certainly a very troubling time, and I'm sure you have lots and lots of questions. Now, the presentation I'm going to show you in a minute with slides the presentation was planned before Russia invaded Ukraine, so it was somewhat in anticipation of this, but it has its own origins. I was asked, in particular by Ira Helfand, who I saw a minute ago on the screen, who I have great respect for, who asked me to talk about how recent developments in the nuclear field might make nuclear war more likely. So I'm going to begin with that and then bring it closer and closer to Ukraine. And I hope we have lots of time for questions. So let me proceed. Now, I worked on this until right away, so it's not exactly a completely perfected slideshow, but here we go. And I think we can get it to just have the Well, I hope you could all see this now, and I'm going to try to get it so you just see there we go. The topic here is the shrinking nuclear firebreak, doctrine, technology, and great power competition. And what I'm going to talk about as succinctly as I possibly can is the nuclear firebreak, the shrinking nuclear firebreak, why that's shrinking, geopolitics, doctrine, and technology, and how this is seen in the Ukraine situation and what could be done. Oh, this is a lot of writing. So I put it there for my purpose. Let me just say what the nuclear firebreak is. The nuclear firebreak is the theoretical space between a non-nuclear or a conventional war and the decision to employ nuclear weapons. At the peak of the Cold War, the firebreak was very, very narrow. That is to say, frontline units in Europe were equipped with atomic artillery shells, and any US encounter there was expected to escalate quickly, immediately, into a full-scale thermonuclear war. And the decision by the US and the Soviet Union to deploy nuclear-armed intermediate-range missiles in Europe, the Pershing II and the Russian SS-20, narrowed that firebreak even more. Now, some of you may be veterans of the peace movement and remember the giant protests in 1982 in Central Park and the ones in Europe against those missiles. And they were effective in persuading the two sides to sign a treaty in 1987, the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, that obliged both sides to eliminate these kinds of weapons, missiles, ground-launched missiles that would attack each other's territory within a certain range, 500 to 5,000 kilometers. And under the doctrine of mutual assured destruction, which we all despise, but it has the effect of eliminating any incentive to use nuclear weapons. So over time, the nuclear firebreak got wider. But in recent years, the firebreak has begun to shrink again. And that's what we have to worry about for several interconnected reasons. First of all, geopolitics, the increased hostility and military competition between US and Russia and the US and China. And then military doctrine. That is the doctrine that guides military forces. All three countries have adopted doctrine that stresses early reliance on the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack. And technology, the introduction of new weapons, hypersonic weapons, and delivery systems that make a leap across the firebreak increasingly likely. So let's talk about what I mean by geopolitics. Throughout the first 2 decades of this century, the US was largely focused on counterterrorism, the global war on terror. But in 2018, the Department of Defense adopted a new military strategy under its policy, the National Defense Strategy, the NDS, which said that from now on, great power competition would be the major focus of US military planning, not the global war on terror. As the NDS stated, the central challenge to US prosperity and security is the reemergence of long-term strategic competition by what the National Security Strategy classifies as revisionist powers, China and Russia. And here's some language that gives you a sense of the thinking of US military leaders. I think it's important for us to understand how people in Washington, at the Pentagon, and the military command centers think. They speak of a new era of great power competition in which we're being challenged by rising China, a more threatening Russia that have modernized their military capabilities. And as a consequence, the US must modernize its own military capabilities and be prepared to fight at a higher level of combat against those countries in every domain of warfare. And the new doctrine that has been adopted by the US military, called Joint All-Domain Warfare, calls for the US military to concentrate all of its firepower from all sources, air power, sea power, the Army, space, and cyber, on key enemy assets, ports, radar centers, military bases, command centers, at the very onset of combat, to rapidly degrade their combat capabilities. In particular, this calls for the deployment of weapons capable of penetrating deep into Russian and Chinese territory to overcome what the military calls Russia's A2AD capabilities, anti-access area denial, meaning their ability to defend themselves against a US invasion, US intervention. God forbid they want to defend themselves against US intervention. So we have to have weapons that make intervention increasingly possible. And that calls for these new technologies that allow attacks deep into Russian and Chinese territory. And this is a chart that describes this weaponry. We don't have time for me to explain it in great detail, but this is from an Army pamphlet, the US Army in Multi-Domain Operations, as would be projected into 2028. And somewhere in here, in the middle there is Russian on one side, whoops, I'll go back. Over here on the left is NATO, on the right is Russia, and you see a convergence of US forces attacking Russia's capabilities deep within their territory to allow penetration, the disintegration of enemy forces, and the exploitation, all domains contested. This is the way this is the US military doctrine illustrated. And to enhance its ability to strike deep within Russian and Chinese territory, the Department of Defense is developing an array of new weapons that would have been banned under the INF Treaty, including hypersonic missiles that could go faster than 5 times the speed of sound, that have this capability. These weapons are currently conventionally armed, but they could be nuclear armed. And the fact that they would threaten those capabilities, you have to picture these same capabilities, radar command centers around Moscow, around St. Petersburg, would also be used to control Russian, or the case might be Chinese, nuclear weapons. So in the event of attack, neither side would know whether this is a conventional attack or a nuclear attack. Now, Russian doctrine, and like Chinese doctrine, I won't talk about China tonight, but you could ask me about it. Russian doctrine has also come to place greater emphasis on the use of high-tech weapons to attack key NATO assets, ports, bases, air bases, command centers at an early stage of combat. And in accordance with this approach, the Russians have developed a range of new weapons, hypersonic weapons of their own, similar to the ones the US is developing. And you may be hearing, as the war in Ukraine evolves, if things get more intense, we'll hear about some of these weapons. The Iskander, a mobile short-range ballistic missile, Sircon, a sea-launched hypersonic missile, and the 9M729, a ground-launched cruise missile. These weapons have been deployed in the past on the far west of Russian territory and in Kaliningrad. I'll talk about that in a minute. And this is worrisome because they are dual capable. They can fire nuclear or conventional weapons. So if they are deployed in Ukraine by Russian forces or near Ukraine by Russian forces, we wouldn't know whether they are nuclear or conventionally armed. And so this is their deployment would be a worrisome factor. In response to these conventional developments, both sides have spoken about increasing their reliance on the early use of nuclear weapons in a conflict. US officials blame Russia for this because of their deployment of the weapons I just described, and say that that Russia has placed an early emphasis on using nuclear weapons to deflect any conventional attack by NATO. Now, there's no clear evidence for this, but I want you to see a statement that Vladimir Putin made in 2018. He says that we reserve the right to use nuclear weapons in response to a nuclear attack on Russia or other use of weapons of mass destruction, or in the case of aggression against us with the use of conventional weapons that threatens the very existence of the state. Now, I find that statement very worrisome in the current circumstances. He could declare that there is a threat to the very existence of the state. But for the US claims of early reliance, there is no evidence. Nonetheless, the Trump administration said that we have to have low-yield weapons, nuclear weapons of our own. And under the Nuclear Posture Review of February 2018, called for the deployment of low-yield nuclear weapons on US submarines. That began in 2019 on the USS Tennessee. And you see a statement from the Nuclear Posture Review calling for this kind of deployment. I also want to mention briefly what I call aggressive posturing or provocative maneuvering. This has increased very much in the past few years, mainly by the US, but also by Russia, of sending, in our case, B-52 bombers right up to Russian territory over the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. And you see a map here of the Baltic Sea area. The US sends B-52s right up here. Now, I want you to see this little enclave. This is Kaliningrad, stuck between Poland and Lithuania. This is part of Russia and a major military base. You can see Poland, Ukraine, Belarus. This could become contested territory. Those B-52s go right up here to where St. Petersburg is. These are nuclear-capable bombers, very threatening. Russia has sent its bombers down this way to Denmark and NATO territory. So there's this constant ratcheting up of nuclear tensions and pressures. So now we come to Ukraine, and we have to see how all of this background is now being manifested in the situation in Ukraine. So first of all, we have the threats made by President Putin, and I cite them here. he made the first one a week ago when he said that if anybody stands in our way, will face consequences such as you have never seen in your entire history, which many of us took as a nuclear threat. And then he has spoken of aggressive moves by NATO countries yesterday, and he said, I'm going to put Russia's nuclear deterrence forces to a special regime of combat duty. I'll come in a minute to what that might mean, although we don't know exactly. People have said this is the first time any power has made nuclear threats in recent time. I just remind you that in 2018, President Trump made very explicit nuclear threats to President Kim of North Korea. What do we know about Russian moves? I've checked with my colleagues in Washington at the Arms Control Association. They say there's no overt indication of heightened, of a change in the status of the disposition of Russian nuclear forces, but still they're worried. There may be some additional activity at Russian nuclear weapons command posts. So we have to be very worried. The US and NATO say that there is nothing to justify the Russian nuclear threats. That is, there's absolutely nothing on our side to justify this. But I don't think that's entirely true. On February 10th, the US deployed 4 nuclear-capable B-52H bombers to Royal Air Force Base Fairford in the UK. These bombers, that you could see a picture of the one landing in the UK on February 10th here. You never know what armaments they're carrying, but the B-52H can carry up to 20 nuclear-equipped air-launched cruise missiles or other, non-nuclear weapons that would prove very threatening to Russia. The US has also deployed additional scores of F-35 Lightning jets to the frontline states, Poland, Romania, and others on the front lines of NATO right opposite Russian territory. And these are dual capable. They're mainly combat planes, the F-35, but they have a dual capable role, not often discussed in Europe or to the American public. And it's important to note that there are an estimated 100 B-61 nuclear gravity bombs forward deployed in Europe, in Italy, Germany, Turkey, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And whether those are on any change in status is impossible for us to know. So there certainly is reason for concern. So there's so much to talk about. What is this trigger in my mind? I'm just getting started on this, friends, and I hope we have a good discussion. But this is what comes to my mind. We have to condemn Putin's threats to use nuclear weapons. Nobody should ever threaten the use of nuclear weapons under any circumstances. But we should call for greater transparency about US nuclear weapons deployments in Europe, rarely discussed in public, and propose the eventual removal of all US tactical nuclear weapons from the region. This is highly dangerous. We hope that any outcome, any peace settlement in Ukraine involves a ban on the deployment of nuclear weapons on its territory, that it become neutral. The Biden administration is now conducting another nuclear posture review to replace the Trump review of 2018. And they're going to be under enormous pressure to expand the U.S. nuclear arsenal. We have to campaign against that, and in particular to oppose the deployment of low-yield nuclear weapons, which makes crossing the threshold so much easier. And finally, I think, as I hope my presentation showed, there's a lot more public education that's necessary about these developments, these recent developments that make the jumping across the threshold, the nuclear threshold, so much easier, and to call for steps to bolster the nuclear firebreak. So I will stop there. We'll turn it over to Denise, and then I hope we have some good discussion about these points. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. Just real quick, I want to discuss how we're going to handle that. I guess I maybe should have handled that at the beginning. So once Denise is done with her presentation, we are going to have a Q&A session. You can put your question in the chat if you'd like. Or if you want, you can put a asterisk in the chat and I can call on you if you'd like to actually, speak to the presenters and ask your question out loud. Or you can also use the raise your hand feature, which is down at the reactions button at the bottom. If you click on that, there's a little option to raise your hand, and then I will call on you. So with that, I give you Denise Duffield.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here in a moment. And hopefully I do this right. And then I go over here and I make it big. So why am I beginning my presentation with the questions and answer slide featuring a quote from Michael Klare? Because as I was putting together my presentation, I was looking at past presentations I've done on Back from the Brink. And this was from the very first webinar we ever did. And I kept it sort of as the closing quote that was up during our Q&A sessions. And I really think, and I put it up because I think it really captures what the Back from the Brink campaign is about, which is we have to start talking to people other than ourselves. We have to talk to people who are in other progressive movements. We have to talk to our neighbors. We have to talk to our city councils and our local leaders. So when I first saw this, I was like, that's it. That's the Back from the Brink quote. So I begin with that now, and I'm happy now 3 years later to actually be sharing a Zoom with Michael. The Back from the Brink campaign began in late 2017. It was initially founded by leaders of Physicians for Social Responsibility and the Union of Concerned Scientists. It is now a US-based grassroots coalition of individuals, organizations, and elected officials that are working together on a multi-year campaign to abolish nuclear weapons and secure a set of common sense policies to reduce nuclear dangers. We are advocating for a set of 5 common sense policy solutions, which I'll talk about in a moment. A lot of I would call it the organizing strategy, is really built around local organizers. Local organizers who build teams and coalitions in their regions and seek endorsements of the campaign from organizations in their area, from elected officials in the area, and they work on other initiatives, of course, related to nuclear weapons abolition. And this process is really helpful for many reasons, but one, for building intersectional outreach and partnerships. In Los Angeles, when we went to work on our city council to adopt a resolution, for example, we reached out to our climate justice allies. We reached out to, of course, natural partners like Veterans for Peace and Interfaith and Pax Christi, and of course, Habakasha. I saw on the Zoom room we had with us Gloria Monteviano, who's the, I think, acting director of the American Society of Hiroshima and Nagasaki A-bomb survivors. So really reaching out to folks, some of which we usually work with, some of which we don't, and pulling together a coalition. And what we're trying to do now, of course, and I'll get to this later, is to find ways to make these local teams that have come together have sustainable things that they do throughout the year once a resolution is adopted or once they've worked with city and local leaders. And the endorsements and the resolutions are really helpful for legislative advocacy because they really demonstrate constituent support that helps build the political will for nuclear weapons abolition. It is one thing to meet with your member of Congress and tell them, I just saw this poll and 70% of people don't want nuclear weapons. And it's quite another thing to be able to sit down and say, hey, these organizations in your district, these cities in your district, these state legislators, these city councilors, these county board members in your district all want you to be a champion, to speak out on these issues, to be a leader and to represent us. You're our representative, and this is what we want you to do. Right now, the nuclear abolition movement needs more power, and this campaign is about building that power. These are our 5 common sense policy solutions, beginning with actively pursuing a verifiable agreement among nuclear armed states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals, renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first, ending the sole unchecked authority of any US president to launch a nuclear attack, taking US nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, and canceling the plan to replace the entire US arsenal with enhanced weapons. To date, we have over 400 organizations that have endorsed the campaign from a variety of arenas. We have 56 municipalities and 6 state legislative bodies that have done so, and these cities range from, recently Boston, Bloomington, Indiana, Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, Tucson, Arizona, lots more. And on our website, and I'll show you this, if you click on any one of these seals, you can see the resolution that was adopted. And of course, this fall, we did a sign-on letter where we had over 320 local and state elected officials sign on to a letter to President Biden, urging him to take bold action on US nuclear weapons policy. And come on, next slide. And as I mentioned, this is, we're working on national policy, but it's really built around local organizing. And I can tell you a little bit, my background, Jeremy read some of what it is. My background prior to Back from the Brink, my organizing was almost exclusively around the cleanup of the Santa Susana Field Lab, which is a contaminated nuclear site in hills above the Simi and San Fernando valleys. We did participate, we did do things, our organization, around nuclear abolition, but it always felt, it didn't feel very effective. We always had events. We would try to get press to cover the events, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki events. We had speaker events, showed films, do an action alert every now and then. It didn't really feel like it was part of something that was building upon something that other folks were doing locally, nationwide. And so when I first got involved with Back from the Brink, one of the things that I realized was a completely different reception that we have when talking about these issues to local leaders. Our city council, some city council members, of course, say this isn't city business, but there's a lot more support than you would imagine from folks at the municipal level, at the state level. And part of the beauty of the resolutions is that they're able to take all of the whereas statements, all of the key information you would want someone to know about nuclear weapons, about why they're dangerous, why they need to be abolished, how much money we spend on them, the health and environmental impacts, with all of the policies that would address those problems in a very succinct way that a legislator will actually read. And so here are photos from some of the actions throughout the country, some of the Back from the Brink resolution hearings and other events. Here's our Los Angeles coalition. And here's an example from Oregon. What they did, they pulled together a very diverse coalition. These are some of the groups that endorsed their efforts. Both the state of Oregon and the city of Portland adopted Back from the Brink resolutions. What is also really great about this particular strategy is that you really can bring it home. I do think that this moment that we're in will make that a little bit easier. But again, they're often customized to that city, how much tax dollars that city spends, bringing in people from the Marshallese community, a Habakashat that may live in the community, all kinds of ways to really bring this issue home. And all of the cities that have in their resolution support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which are most of them, then also become part of ICANN's cities appeal. And in fact, most of the ICANN cities came through back from the Brink resolutions. So I'm going to direct you now to our advocacy tools on our website. Here's where we try to really provide folks what they need if they want to start organizing locally in their community. A toolkit, a guide on understanding the process in your area for getting resolutions adopted, sample requests, sample resolutions, and other kinds of organizing materials. We now have become an official coalition. We were a campaign, now we're a coalition that is running a campaign. And as part of that, we've got ways for both organizations and individuals to deepen their engagement with the campaign. For individuals and for small groups that are working locally in their community, we will have back from the Brink hub, sort of a distributed organizing model to enable that sustained activity throughout the year. And for organizations, we are having, many of our endorsing organizations are now becoming coalition partners, committing basically to deepen their engagement, to talk to nuclear weapons about with their own members, to get involved in a variety of ways in terms of advancing the campaign. And that is the end of my short presentation. Here is how you can get in touch with us. Our website is preventnuclearwar.org. There's our email, our Facebook, and our Twitter. And again, as I said, this, for me as a local organizer, this campaign was really revelatory, and that's why I got involved in the local effort. I could really see how our efforts in local communities really can add up to something that will get the attention of decision makers in Washington. And that's what we're trying to do here. And this moment is right for doing just that. I will stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Denise. So with that, we're going to open it up for questions from our audience. So if you have one, feel free to post it in the chat, and I'd be happy to read it aloud. Or like I said, if you'd like to pose a question out loud, put an asterisk or raise your hand in the little reactions function down at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. All right, back from the beginning, back when Michael was speaking, I think the first hand was raised was I, and I'm not sure about the pronunciation, if it's Jana or Yana. But you had your hand raised first, but you're on mute.
That was an accident, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I don't understand this computer stuff very well, sorry.
That's okay, I only pretend to know what I'm doing, so.
Okay.
All right, so I think the next hand is Lynn. Lynn, you're on mute.
See this cauliflower? It looks like a brain. My mom always said, use your noggin, you know, cauliflower, not war. My mom died of leukemia. Here's my mom, a photo of her in the kitchen, always looking over me. And she died of breathing in plutonium from the first and biggest fire at Rocky Flats in 1957. She died at 38 years old, and I was 16. My brother was 15, and my little brother was 5. So just a quick statement, but I'll have more questions. Mostly about Victoria Newland and Jake Sullivan. And 2004 and 2014, we are the bully. The US is the bully, and we have to stop now. Or we are the ones who are gonna, well, blame Russia, but it's us that caused it. Just saying. Done.
Thanks, Lynn. All right, so I'm going to go to the chat for the first question from the chat, and this is from LW Lee. It's for Michael. Please clarify the Russian doctrine he wrote. Was that what the Russians official said? And he said he could talk about Chinese doctrine. So if you want to, you can go ahead and get into that for a minute, Michael.
So the first part of that was what, to clarify Russian doctrine, is that it?
Yeah, he's wondering if that was what what Russia officially said, or whether perhaps you're
Right.
referring some stuff from that.
Russia, official Russian doctrine is, so far as I understand it, official Russian doctrine is identical to US doctrine, and these are both available in print. The US doctrine in the Nuclear Posture Review, and Russian doctrine in that statement by Vladimir Putin, which is they all begin by saying, oh, we're going to only use nuclear weapons in response to a nuclear attack. And then they add, oh, yes, and in the event that we face a cataclysmic conventional attack that threatens a defeat, then we can use nuclear weapons in response to a non-nuclear attack. And the US, under the Nuclear Posture Review, has also included a cyber attack or use of chemical biological weapons as a legitimate reason for the use of nuclear weapons. And it appears that that's the same with Russian doctrine. So it's very hard to find any real difference between them. What we don't know exactly, we don't know a lot about Chinese nuclear doctrine. Their official statement is that China will only use nuclear weapons, will never use nuclear weapons first, but exclusively in response and retaliation to attack. But they have deployed some dual-use nuclear weapons that could be ballistic missiles, dual-use ballistic missiles that some people think could be used to attack American bases in the event of a war, say, over Taiwan. So this is a trend of increasing reliance on nuclear weapons.
Thanks so much for that, Michael. Now going back to live questions, I think I saw Steven Slainer next, and you're muted right now.
Hi, Mike. Haven't seen you in a while. We both remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, but at least there we knew what was going on, and Kennedy, for all his hawkishness initially, was careful to leave an off-ramp for the Russians to negotiate, and we negotiated our way out of this. So my first question is there an off-ramp in this situation? And my second question is, why is Putin doing this now? What was the need to do it? What does he hope to get?
It's very hard for us to answer your second question. My best guess is that he misjudged the meaning of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. That he saw that, as so many commentators on the left and the right around the world saw that as a sign of American weakness. And that the West was weak and divided and distracted, and that this was the moment to achieve what he had been seeking for some time, which is to halt the eastward expansion of NATO and to prevent Ukraine from becoming a future NATO state. Right. That he'd been thinking about this for some time, but that this moment seemed like an opportune moment to proceed. That's my guess, that if he waited longer, it would be too late. Now, your first question about an off-ramp, Kennedy negotiated in secret. Remember that there was no the deal he made with Khrushchev was made in secret. Right. Is there a chance here? I think there is a chance if people move swiftly enough to Putin and convince him that he's made a mistake, a terrible mistake, misjudge the situation. And if he negotiates now, he has the best chance to escape without too many losses.
No, I meant that the U.S. has got to make a concession. The U.S. has got to put Ukraine membership in NATO on the table, just so the Russians say they can get something out of it.
Yes, I think, but I don't think the U.S. has to do anything. I think the Ukrainian president has said we're willing to accept neutrality of the country, and the U.S. could say we stand with the Ukrainian president.
He has said that?
Yes.
Oh, that I didn't. Was that reported?
Yes. Zelensky has said we're willing to negotiate a condition of neutrality for our country, and that is the best possible outcome. And right. then the U.S. could say we support that. That would be my best hope, that they can achieve that swiftly.
It would be good. Thank you.
See you, Michael. So I have a question from Ira. He wants to know if you could talk about the Russian dead hand system, Michael.
The Russian dead hand system, also known as perimeter, is thought to be a nuclear command and control system. I think Ira knows the answer to this question, but wants me to talk about it. It's a nuclear command and control system that supposedly would operate as follows. If there's warnings of a U.S. nuclear attack on Russia, and the commanders are cut off from communication, and they're indicating that the command centers and the radars and all of the early warning systems of a Russian nuclear system have been silenced, assuming that, which would presume that they've been attacked by US missiles, that under those circumstances, the system would be automated and launch nuclear weapons against the United States. There have been calls for the adoption of a similar system in the United States because of the rapid acceleration of warfare due to the development of hypersonic weapons and cyber weapons. But the US claims that there's always going to be a human hand at the control of nuclear weapons.
Thanks, Michael. Next up
Could you write
from...
what that's called in the chat? Could you write what that's called? The dead what?
Dead hand.
Dead hand. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
If you want to learn about it, see the famous movie Dr. Strangelove. It appears in Dr. Strangelove. And the world blows up at the end of the movie.
I have Louis next.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. So I had a few questions that if I could ask. So the first one was, so I think it's a good idea that we should try to draw down nuclear weapons, but I'm wondering, like, what is the guarantee that, well, I suppose can't remember, but what is the guarantee that the other side will follow through? Like, how can we guarantee that if we draw down, then Russia and China will also draw down? Like, how do we know that they won't hide them or?
That's a very fair question. Now, let's put China aside for the moment. Okay. In the case of Russia, we have a treaty, the New START Treaty, the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, that includes a provision for inspection by technical means to ensure that the agreement is carried out. Both sides have rights under the treaty to inspect certain facilities and also have technical means of verification, satellites and the like, to ensure that they are being carried out. So we have very high confidence in Russia's compliance with New START. These are the strategic nuclear weapons I'm talking about. These are ballistic missiles. We do not have any such agreement regarding tactical nuclear weapons, which I mentioned the ones the US has. Russia has a lot of those. So we would hope that in some future negotiations between the US and Russia, those weapons can also be included and subject to inspections, but they are not. So it's only the what are called strategic nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, bombers, ICBMs, that are counted and are inspected. We have no agreement. There are no agreements between the US and China whatsoever. So there's no provisions for inspections. Both sides rely on their own technical means of verification, namely satellites, to rely on what we know about China, but it's incomplete.
I see. And another question that we have is that so I thought Ukraine neutrality was put on the table, but like, wouldn't this be in a way like giving a hand to Russia? Like, shouldn't Ukraine be allowed to make their own political decisions? Like, if they want to join NATO, shouldn't they be allowed to join NATO? Like, it's like kind of like Russia's bullying us into like, in a way, giving up Ukraine. Just my opinion. Just
I understand. NATO is a mutual self-defense treaty which obliges any country to come to the aid of any other member, and it has certain conditions for membership. The country has to be democratic, it has to be stable, it can't be corrupt, it has to have defined borders, it can't be a civil war. There are a whole list of conditions that you must fulfill before you could become a member of NATO. Ukraine does not satisfy the preconditions for membership in NATO, and President Biden has said that, and the NATO leadership has said that. Now, should Ukraine have the right in some future time to join NATO? I don't know why there should be. It could, I suppose, have that right, but I don't think it's a God-given right that any country has to join NATO. In the present circumstance, I would say, let's put that off for a generation. Let's see if Ukraine could ever achieve the preconditions for membership. That's far off. In the meantime, let's make Ukraine neutral and avoid this altogether.
Okay. And if I just ask one last final question, that would be, yes.
Yes, because other people have questions.
What was that?
I think other people have questions.
My apologies. Yeah. Thank you very much for the answers.
Thanks, Louis. So I wanted to mention real quickly, as kind of a piggyback to some of the information Denise was giving us about Back from the Brink. In New Hampshire, we've passed eight resolutions in towns in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire Peace Action and American Friends Service Committee had been doing a lot of work on this actually before I got involved with Back from the Brink and Union of Concerned Scientists. So Judy and Arnie Alpert have been doing a lot of work on this. And between Denise and Judy in the chat, you will find lots of resources about either how to organize locally in your town if you don't live in New Hampshire, and then Judy specifically put some information germane to New Hampshire organizing. So I just wanted to take a minute to mention that activity in the chat and the success that we've had in New Hampshire organizing for Back from the Brink. So I have a question from somebody watching on Facebook. So I guess the stream is working there now. Magic does happen. The question is from Kim Bergier. She says, do you know of the Veterans for Peace Alternative Nuclear Posture Review? And when is Biden administration expected to release their NPR?
I don't know about the Veterans for Peace Alternative. The Biden review was scheduled to come out at the end of February, but we understand that they've put that aside. I think they're just overwhelmed with Ukraine-related developments. And we understand there's been a very deep debate within the Biden administration between, I guess you could call them nuclear hawks and well, I can't say doves. Everybody in the Biden administration is committed to rebuilding the nuclear arsenal, all three legs of the so-called strategic triad: ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and bombers. So there's no debate about that. Maybe some debate about how quickly to proceed with that. There is a debate about whether to continue the plans for the low-yield nuclear weapons that I discussed earlier. There may be some within the administration who want to continue with that program and others that want to scrap it. There's also some question about sole authority. Does the president of the United States be the only person who authorizes nuclear weapons, or should others weigh in on this, like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and members of Congress? So there is debate going on within the administration about the use of nuclear weapons, and we don't know the outcome of that.
All right, this looks like this is going to be the last question. Joe Burton, you have your hand raised and you have the floor, but you're muted.
These a low yield weapon, how does that compare with the Hiroshima bomb?
It could be smaller or bigger.
Okay.
Low yield is, the average bombs on or warheads on ICBMs are, 150, 250,000 kilotons, which would be 10 times greater than Hiroshima. So the low yield weapons could be Hiroshima sized, or even smaller. The difference is less perhaps the size than the intended targets. The strategic bombs are, this goes back to this horrible thinking about nuclear war, that the way you win a nuclear war is by destroying every city on the other side. Every large city industrial center, you just obliterate it. Through threat, through nuclear deterrence, massive retaliation, mutual assured destruction. The low yield weapons are envisioned as battlefield weapons, this insanity that you can actually use a nuclear weapon in a war as an actual battlefield weapon to wipe out an air base or a tank formation. So it's more the intended use of the weapon than the actual megatonnage that distinguishes those weapons. And that's why where I find them so troubling, because I think it's a fantasy, an insane fantasy, to believe that you could use nuclear weapons as a weapon of war without prompting the use of strategic nuclear weapons and human annihilation.
Thanks so much. All right, well, we're at 8:01. There are a couple of other questions in the chat that just came in. I'm not sure what people's appetite is for staying a couple minutes longer to get those in. Yeah, all right, sounds good. Geez, and then I scrolled up and lost it. So Betsy Kelly asks, at the end of the Cold War dissolution of the USSR, didn't the U.S. State Department recommend either abolish NATO or including Russia?
I think at the end of the Cold War, there was a lot of different visions of where things might go. There was certainly talk of including Russia in NATO. But, you know, NATO is a giant bureaucracy. A lot of people's careers hinge on serving in NATO, and nobody wanted to turn it off. It was like a giant, you know, like the bunny, the battery bunny just wanted to keep on going and going and going. So they kept finding reasons to keep it in existence. So I don't think there was ever any serious thought of turning it off, of shutting it down. But yes, there was thought of including Russia at one time. But I think very rapidly it became an instrument for intimidating Russia and asserting the power of the West.
I got a hand up from Mervyn.
Yeah, the term neutrality is used. And obviously, that would imply not being part of NATO. But what also does that mean militarily for, say, a country like Finland and in this case, Ukraine?
You know, I don't know what they're talking about negotiation-wise. I would think of Austria as a case, as a country which chose at the end of during the Cold War, not to be part of NATO. Austria is not in NATO. It's not, and was not part of the Warsaw Pact either. It chose, of course, to avoid being included in either one of the blocs. So what I was thinking of about neutrality is Ukraine that would be independent of blocs, not in the Western Bloc, not under Russian dominion either. It would have its own military, but not part of another military bloc.
And where would the military weaponry come from in that case?
Well, Austria buys weapons, like Finland and Sweden and Switzerland from on the international arms market.
Thanks for that question, Mervyn. All right, and then this will be the last question for the evening, and it's from John Lamperity. He says, it seems to me this would be an unusually good moment for the U.S. to announce a total no first use policy. What are your thoughts on that, Michael?
Well, I believe in that, of course. Like I said, what troubles me is that the U.S. has a policy of using nuclear weapons in response to other than nuclear attacks. And that's what I would first say, nuclear weapons should only be used in response to a nuclear attack on this country, period.
And I'd like to note that in bird dogging back during the presidential primary, we got then candidate Biden to say publicly that he supported a no first use policy. And he liked to add the fact that he had did it 30 years before Elizabeth Warren ever endorsed such a policy. And we're struggling to get him to, commit to what he said that he'd do up in, I believe it was in Berlin, New Hampshire. And then he doubled down on it and confirmed that later the same day through our bird dogging efforts at Union of Concerned Scientists and New Hampshire Peace Action.
Yeah. Well, I should add that, we all want a world in which there's zero nuclear weapons. That's the ultimate objective. But short of that, they should never be used never be used deliberately as an act of war.
May I just throw in the comment that I was thinking that it would be a very good move in this precise moment, a sort of as a kind of passive aggressive response to the Putin's announcing that the Russian nuclear forces were on alert. As a response to that, we will say, there is no, implying there is no reason for the Russian nuclear forces to be on alert. The United States will never use nuclear weapons first. It would just, I think, might be a good contribution right now to the sort of discussion that's going on in this crisis about the Ukrainian war.
Hear, hear.
Me too. Well, with that, we're going to bring tonight's presentation to a close. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending. If you want to stay in touch with New Hampshire Peace Action at newhampshirepeaceaction.org and look us up on Facebook and YouTube to learn more about what we're working on. And Will is going to tell you a little bit about what our next conversation series is going to be on. So thanks very much for coming out tonight.
Is that Lucy?
This is Lucy. Yeah,
Right.
Lucy.
Do want to say thank you so much, Michael and Denise, for coming on tonight and walking us through that. This is a really critical moment to be talking about how we step back from the nuclear brink, and I appreciate having two of the great American thinkers on the subject here to help us through that. So you can join us every other Monday night for this conversation series. On March 14th, 2 weeks from today, we're going to have Una from Friends Forever, Northern Ireland. She's going to talk about mobilizing youth for peace. It'll be interesting to hear from young people about how we work with young people to get them engaged in the peace movement and engaged in peacemaking. 2 weeks after that, we'll have Hassan Al-Tayyab from Yemen. From FCNL, Friends Committee on National Legislation. He's going to talk to us about Yemen and the work being done to try to end the Saudi-led blockade that's leading to hundreds of thousands of deaths through cholera, starvation, and violent bombing. 2 weeks after that, we'll be talking to folks with 350 New Hampshire about the work that they've been doing. A little known fact is that 350 New Hampshire is a part of New Hampshire Peace Action. They exist under our umbrella, and it's about time we had them on to talk. 2 weeks after that, April 25th, Stephanie Savell is going to talk to us about the Costs of War project. So stay on our listserv, keep an eye on it, and join us every other Monday at 7. Thanks, Jeremy, for hosting tonight, too. Good night, everyone.
Good night, folks.